I've addressed this before, but you're right. I mean, I've answered so many questions. It's hard to sit there and swim through everything. If you go on the YouTube page, it might be better, but then, I also have, before we even started the YouTube channel, everything was just Facebook. We've been around for a while, and so trying to find a needle in the haystack is just that. And so why don't I just try to respond to it again? Tried to look previous posts about this, didn't see it. Where does it discuss excused absences for children who are in outside private OT, PT, speech, and I'll throw ABA therapy in there as well, so it is not held against them. And guys, there's not anything in the IDEA about that, okay? It's not going to sit there and mention why these should be excused absences, and I'll explain that. Let me do that right now, and then I'll go to the other aspect of it. Guys, the school system is responsible for providing a FAPE. Now, what does a FAPE mean? A free and appropriate public education, okay? So really, you shouldn't have to supplement with private outside services if the school was truly doing their job in providing your child a free, appropriate public education. Now, at the same time, does every child require physical therapy? No. That's an IEP team decision, and it's based upon a parameter of needs of whether or not that PT, as an example, relates back and supports the child in their educational performance areas. Now, what are educational performance areas? Well, that's academics, it's communication, it's social emotional learning. But see, there's also some other ones that aren't readily, they're just not readily discussed. And it's sort of individualized toward the child's disability and needs. But you also have functional skills, okay? Daily living skills, things like that. That can be another educational performance area. So these things have to be the first consideration. And then does that related service, PT, OT, speech language, ABA therapy, things like that, does it relate over to support these educational performance areas to where your child can make tangible, measurable progress? It's a support cast is what related services are. And so you have to sit there and request that through the school system. And, if they're not providing it, or if they can sit there and justify or show why your child doesn't require, let's say, PT, and you're going, no, I think the child does because my child has a script. Okay, this is where we get into the little nuances, all right? If your child has a script, well, then that would be your justification. Like I said, it's not going to be written in the IDEA as a law. Every state does have, I believe every state, at least the ones where we have an office, but I believe the majority, if not every state, has what would be considered truancy laws, or what we call compulsory education laws. Meaning if you enroll your child in a public education system, then you are beholden to their rules. Well, they want your child to go to school. Why? Because most of the country's funding mechanisms and channels are all tied to butts and seats. And they need butts and seats in order to justify the money that they're getting from the state or the federal government. So therefore, they want kids there. Then there's also that whole thing of, if the child's not there, we have all this learning loss, that then they sit there and they say, there's neglect, parental neglect, or whatever like that. It's amazing, though, that if you homeschool your kid, they don't seem to have that same position. In most states, we homeschool everyone, but my kids are homeschooled except for my daughter who has an IEP. And I can tell you, they surpass expectations when it comes to national standards. So, there's no magic with the public school. They make those arguments like, well, if they're not here, then they're not making progress. They didn't seem to care during COVID. It's sort of amazing how that all happened. But, which we know now, looking back retrospectively, that we should never have closed our schools. Now we're dealing with, as I predicted back in May and June and July of 2020, We're dealing with a lot of learning loss. 6 months for some kids, up to a year and a half for those most vulnerable populations and demographics. Okay? But compulsory education truancy loss. This is where that nuance is, and you need to look at your specific state as to what those laws say. Many states leave it up to the purview of the principal to sit there and make those justifications or those demands. Now, you can use your child's disability under 504 and even under IDEA to sit there, and especially under 504, because it's an equal access sort of civil rights law in and of itself. Now, just because your child has an IEP, they enjoy automatically the benefits of 504 as a Civil Rights Act, okay? So there's no extra step you have to go through. If your child has an IEP, then they enjoy the civil rights protective benefits of 504. And so in that kind of stuff, if your child has those additional needs and scripts, and it's from a medical doctor, for example, or let's say a provider, that these services are required, and during this time, then at that point, yeah, you can start making some arguments that there needs to be a medical plan in place, there needs to be accommodations written in to where, you know, they can, your child can be released from school to receive these services. But like I said, I would not do that until you have crossed out that it's not the school's responsibility to provide that. A lot of parents have no idea that the schools are shortchanging their kids with regards to that requirement, that legal requirement to provide your child with a FAPE. And so they'll sit there and say, well, we don't do that. There's very few things a school doesn't do, all right? They can provide ABA therapy. We do it all the time, guys. Just because they say we don't do that, well, whoever you're talking to is an ignoramus, and they can do it, all right? So just because somebody wears a badge or somebody, you know, has some false impression of themselves that they have some kind of decision-making or authority doesn't make them competent, okay? People don't know everything. I do not do tax law, guys. Don't ask me. I'm a lawyer. I could, but you don't want to ask me. I'm not competent in that area. It wouldn't be ethically right for me to practice or give advice in an area where I'm not competent. But it's amazing how many people in public education, even administrators, who, by the way, are not required to be competent in these laws in order to be in these positions. But yet they sit in these meetings and they spout that mouth off and they run diarrhea out of their mouth when they don't really know what they're talking about. And what ends up happening is they end up getting their school system into a lot of problems like due process complaints, where the parent becomes educated, let's say 6 months or a year, or even 2 years down the road. Well, there's a 2-year statute of limitations. And then the parent gets upset because they feel like they were lied to. Well, it wasn't technically a lie. It was just an ignorant comment, where the person, you know, sitting in a position of authority thought they knew the rules and they didn't. Okay, so we don't need that kind of disharmony, but it happens all the time, and there's nothing I can do to sit there and stop that. It's going to continue to happen because humans continue to human, and that means that we are all valuable and we make mistakes, and that's just how it is. It's just that you got to be smart enough as an individual to sit there and know, that doesn't sound right. But that's also why people are on this page, okay? So I would first check those boxes off. Is my child entitled to related services? Okay. And if they are, and the parent is like, well, I still want to supplement, doesn't necessarily justify pulling your child out of school to do that. Now, like I said, if there's a medical script, if there's a designated need, stuff like that, then yes, you could make sure you read your compulsory education law. There's typically justifications in there, meaning for a medical appointment, things of that nature. But if it's recurring, once again, if it's absolutely justified and it's recurring, then it's under the purview of the disability and therefore equal access, therefore the need for an accommodation. That is more a 504 issue. It is not related over to an IEP necessarily, and the school's responsibility to provide specialized instruction and a FAPE. All right. Once again, remember, if you have an IEP, your child enjoys the civil rights protections and accommodations under a 504. All right? It can be written into your IEP, but understand the difference. Civil Rights Act, that denotes accommodations for equal access. IEP is about specialized instruction and your child's right to a FAPE with those services that include related services. All right? So within your IEP, your child's provided accommodations. Well, those accommodations are actually more tied to 504. It's just that we embed them inside the IEP instead of having two different plans. All right? It is a discussion that you need to have with your school district. And, understand that, principals have a lot of power. And, the big problem with them is, it tends to be, like I said, the butts in the seat and the funding. And, just negotiate and talk to them. Well, what's that threshold? And if they go, well, it's more about having your child here for learning. Well, I get that. At the same time, my child has a disability and there's only so much sunshine in a day to be able to get this very critical therapy for my child. And, that's what the medical experts are saying that my child requires. And so therefore I need accommodations on the school side. Okay. And typically it works out that way. And that's how I would recommend going about it.